Hi, this is Ethan Tapper, the Chittenden County Forester. So one of the common misunderstandings about forests, or something that you need to understand in order to really get how forests work, is that many people think about forests as these static, unchanging systems, when in reality forests are incredibly dynamic. So within forested systems, we now understand that the death of trees, what we call through natural disturbances, these disturbance events are incredibly important for the way that forests grow over time. And so what happens is that trees fall over, trees get killed by something, trees die, and in response to that we see the regeneration of new trees. Now in old growth forests, what we see is that these small scale disturbances and the ensuing regeneration is happening all the time. So it's not just a whole bunch of trees over a large area growing and becoming old and then all dying. It's actually this constant state of small disturbances and regeneration, small disturbances and regeneration. And what this creates is, instead of this monolithic forest where it all looks the same, it's this incredibly diverse, complex mosaic of all different kinds of tree sizes and tree ages, dead standing trees, dead trees on the ground, pockets of young forest, pockets of old forest, and pockets of different ages and sizes of trees that are all interspersed with one another. To our eye, for some reason, most people think that that looks really messy. For some reason, what's aesthetically pleasant to us is a forest that is in some way monolithic, that is tall, evenly spaced trees, nothing growing in the understory. But that's actually not what a healthy, diverse, complex, resilient forest looks like. So a lot of the management here at Bear Island is in line with ecological forest management, or ecological forestry it's called, which is basically just a recognition of the fact that forests are these incredibly complex systems. They are a lot more than trees, and yes, trees are really important, and part of our role as foresters is to understand how to manage those trees so that we can responsibly and sustainably and regeneratively extract those resources when it's appropriate, but also recognizing that they are not just trees, that there are other components of the forest that are incredibly critical to their livelihood and their health, ranging from wildlife, air, water, plants, geological features. All of these different attributes, as our understanding of forests increases, we understand to have massive feedbacks into the health of our trees. And I would also argue that many of these resources have intrinsic value. So who would say that different species of wildlife don't have the right to exist, or don't have value in and of themselves, independent of whether they have value to us as people? And so I think that there's an opportunity to manage our forests in a way that is regenerative, that is actually helping to correct some of the detrimental situations that have been created by humans on the landscape, and that also is symbiotic or mutually beneficial, where we can harvest this local renewable resource, wood, while at the same time building into our forests an understanding of their interconnectedness, and the fact that their systems, their processes have intrinsic value. And we can do both of those things at the same time. So I'm standing here in one of the patches that I cut in 2017. There was a couple different goals for these patches. One is that I inherited a forest which was dominated by largely unhealthy trees as a result of poor logging practices in the past, and I wanted to grow healthy trees. And so I took these areas which are basically dominated purely by unhealthy trees, and I cut them, retaining all the healthy trees that were left in the patch, basically as seed trees, and regenerated a new age class of trees within those patches. The patches ranged in size from a 1/4 acre to a 2-acre patch. We understand that complexity in our forests, regeneration, areas of young forest, areas of multi-age forest are a really important part of the forest that we want to grow. They're forests that are that have these attributes that are more resilient to disturbances. We expect to be more resilient to the effects of climate change. And also we understand that that areas of young forest and areas of multi-age forest are underrepresented across our landscape as a result of forests that are recovering from large-scale pasture abandonment. To understand forests, you need to understand that they are defined not by the uniformity, but by their complexity. As forests, as systems grow and develop, they will become more complex, more irregular, more diverse. And that diversity, you can think about it in a couple of different ways. You can think about the normal way that we think about diversity, just the number of species. We call that species diversity. But what's also really important is not just the species you have, but the way that they're growing. So the different sizes and ages of trees in a forest is called structural diversity. And structural diversity is really important. It's correlated with resilient forests, so forests that are able to stay healthy in the face of climate change and other disturbances. Also forests which are able to store more carbon, and forests which have better wildlife habitat. We think that old growth forests that were here prior to European settlement were much, much more structurally diverse than the forests that we have today. And so there's a really interesting role that humans can play in making forests more structurally diverse sooner than they would be able to naturally. And so on my property here in Bolton, Bear Island, that's just what I've done. So what you'll see behind me is an area where I've just cut a bunch of trees to create a canopy gap and just laid them on the ground. And so this is interesting in a couple different ways. So number one, anytime we're creating openings in the forest and allowing light to reach the forest floor, we're creating, hopefully, a site for new regeneration. So what I'm hoping to see in this gap is in a couple of years, you'll see raspberries and blackberries coming in, and then eventually you'll see young trees, and over time those young trees will grow and develop. And as they're growing and developing, that structure from now through when they're large trees, every stage of that will have valuable wildlife benefit. And so we know that, for instance, many of our warblers like to nest in these low shrub layers. So a regenerating forest is not just valuable because it is, indicative of trees that will be larger later, but it actually has structural benefits in that moment. The other thing that we recognize about canopy gaps is that they're also beneficial not just in the regeneration that they're creating, but as structures in and of themselves. So we know that in these canopy gaps, there'll be higher air temperatures, it'll attract more insects, and that it's a valuable feature that birds will use, flycatchers, they'll perch on one side of the gap, they'll fly through and catch insects on the wing and eat them. So I also, in this case, it didn't make sense to come down here and pull all the firewood, the potential firewood, out of this gap. So I just left it on the ground, and that's another really important thing to understand, is that not every tree that is felled or that falls over needs to be pulled out of the woods. There is no waste in the forest. These trees that are laying on the ground will decompose over time. They'll become soil. They'll become a fertile seed bed for certain species of trees like hemlock and yellow birch that really, really like to grow in rotting and decomposing wood. And that by me leaving these trees laying like this, I've also created some structural protections from deer browse. So, now in Vermont, in some parts of the state, we know we have an overabundance of deer, and the deer eating the buds and the twigs of small trees inhibits their ability to grow and regenerate, and inhibits our ability to over time have a diverse forest. And so just creating a big messy pile in the middle of this canopy gap, while it may look aesthetically unpleasant, actually has a lot of structural benefits.